On a late spring day in 1919, one of America's wealthiest men sat up in his sickbed in his Manhattan home and called to one of his caregivers for pen and paper. Andrew Carnegie, 83, once one of the mightiest industrialists in the world, took up his instruments brought to him and began to write as if possessed. When he finished, he summoned to his chambers his longtime personal secretary, James Bridge. "Take this to Frick," Carnegie said as he handed the letter over to his old confidant. The two men had not exchanged a word in nearly 20 years. Not since Carnegie drove Frick out of the business and Frick successfully pressed a monumental lawsuit against his former partner, the first in a long string of vengeful acts. Bridge left Carnegie and made his way down Fifth Avenue from the awe-inspiring 64-room mansion across from Central Park. By the time Bridge arrived at Frick's mansion, a modern-day palace that its owner had vowed would make Carnegie's place look like a hovel, Bridge would have been beside himself, not only wondering as to the contents of the message he carried, but fearing the response from the man whom it was addressed. As Frick tore open the envelope and scanned the contents, he looked up at Bridge accusingly, as if the messenger knew full well what was in the letter. "So Carnegie wants to meet me, does he?" Bridge could only stare back, dumbfounded. In his script, Carnegie had reasoned that both he and Frick were growing old, and surely it was time to meet and patch up the wounds that they had inflicted upon each other. Henry Clay Frick showed no sign of gratitude or relief. "Yes, you can tell Carnegie I'll meet him," Frick said finally, wadding the letter and tossing it back at Bridge. "Tell him I'll see him in hell, where we're both going." After reading that, I was immediately addicted to this book. This boiled down scene is from the opening chapter of the book that I wanted to talk to you today about, and it's called Meet You in Hell, and it was written by Les Standiford. This book hits hard. It's an outstanding read about two great founders that both have a deep love of cost control and technology. Both men, they start with empty pockets and stack millions upon millions. They become codependent upon one another. For Carnegie, Frick became his dirty shadow. Frick had an ambition, a singleness of purpose, and lack of self-doubt that even Carnegie envied. Frick, he did the dirty work so that Carnegie could stay clean. As Frick stared at Carnegie, what he saw was his own clean shadow. Frick needed Carnegie's grand vision in his capital to channel his hard drive towards something much bigger than himself. But before we go any further here, we've got to go back to where each man came from to see their roots and what made them both deeply driven in their business, and how a powerful magnet, that of steel, stuck them together in business and also in their lives. On the last episode, we had spoke about Andrew Carnegie, and if you haven't had the chance to take a listen to that episode, I would highly recommend it. We go deep in his life, and you can get a good understanding of where he came from and how he grew in business and how he enriched himself and how he became ultimately the richest man in the world. Carnegie, he was born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland. And his father, he was a small businessman. He was operating something like 4 or 5 of these weaving looms. And at the time, he was producing these high-end textiles. In the family, they weren't rich, but they also weren't poor. They lived generally a comfortable lifestyle. Growing up, Andrew, he went to school from the ages of 8 to around 13 or so. And he learns the basics, the reading, the writing, the math, in a really rough form of English. And one thing that he notices really early on is that he has like this steel trap for remembering everything. And this is something that would serve him well over the course of his life. And we're going to see that more in here in just a moment. While in school, things were generally good. At home, things started to turn into a different story because you see, the steam loom had arrived and it was allowing for the mass production of textiles. And think about these textiles being produced like cheap candy. When that happens, the prices fall a lot. In his father's orders, they just dry up, and he doesn't do anything to advance himself in that technology. He's stuck in his own ways. And I kind of think about this like John D. Rockefeller that we had talked about, who had cut his kerosene production costs to a point where he could sell it for less than what others could produce it for. So, I mean, just imagine he's out there selling a gallon of kerosene for 35 cents. And then as a small business owner, it's costing you 50 cents. I mean, basically you're dead, right? He's got the upper hand on you. And this is what happens to Carnegie's father. He just can't keep up and he refuses to adopt this new technology. And for Andrew, this changes his whole world and he really feels this in his soul. And he makes this promise really early on to himself. And he says, I remember that shortly after this, I began to learn what poverty meant. There came a resolve that I would cure that when I got to be a man. When I read that line, it hits me also because you and I, we get the advantage to see how the next 70 years of his life turn out. And I really admire this resolve at a young age because we can see that this is a deep drive and that his words, they actually mean something because he backs them with actions. When you back your words with actions, they go a long, long ways. And it's always about the actions. And Carnegie always kept this promise in mind. And we spoke about this at length on the last episode. It drove everything for Carnegie. The way he used new technology sooner than just about anyone else, always approving plant upgrades when his managers ask, the way he uses strict cost control, even when he has millions of dollars in the bank. In fact, he has a mantra that he had adopted and he repeated over and over. Profits and prices are cyclical, subject to any number of transient forces of the marketplace. Cost, however, could be strictly controlled. That was something that he would repeat all the time. His managers and his men knew it. Then to round out this promise to himself, he uses literacy to advance himself in the world, to be dependent upon no one else. And then later on in his life, he's going to share his love of literacy through 2,500, maybe up to 3,000 libraries that he would have built all over the world. This promise is really everything. But at this time, he's 12, maybe 13 years old. He's living in Scotland. In his mother, she makes a difficult call. She rounds everyone up one day and she says, you know what? We're going to America. The family, they're broke. They don't have any money. So his parents, they go borrow $20 from the relatives and they set sail for America in 1848 with their sights on Pittsburgh via New York. The crossing is calm. Carnegie, he finds himself helping the deckhands, learning the ropes. Literally, he was helping with the ropes and the sails, directing people all over the ship. They were short-staffed and they needed help, so he jumped in. Once they arrive in New York, he says he's bewildered by the size. He's never seen a city this big. There's people everywhere. They don't stay here long. They quickly jump on another boat and head to Pittsburgh, arriving there after 3 weeks. And they're going to take up residence with his mother's sisters. They're going to live in this small 2-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a building. And then down below, his father does what he knows best. He goes back into weaving textiles by hand. But like in Scotland, he can't keep up with the steam power. And so he goes and he takes employment in a cotton factory where he also helps young Andrew get his first job as a bobbin boy. And you can just picture a 13-year-old boy here. He's ducking under machines that are moving at a high rate of speed. These are machines that could take an arm or a leg off. Also that he could place a new spool of thread on the machine while it's moving. That way they didn't have to shut it down and slow down production. And he's doing all of this for $1.20 a week. That's just wild. And he's working long days, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. But however, he's determined and he keeps driving forward very aggressively here. 40 miles away, the other half of the story is being born. It's the year 1849, and Henry Clay Frick, he is born at home on the farm. And as a boy, most people call him Clay. He never knew the comforts of a modest life like Carnegie had did as a youth. It was just a hard life for him growing up. His father was a failed painter, not like a house painter, but like a painter of pictures. He really loved that craft, but he wasn't very good at it. He shifted into farming, but he was only slightly better. Young Clay here, he's forced to work his fingers to the bone just to help feed the family and help put clothes on their back. Now, there's not a lot of coverage in the book about Frick's early life, or there's not even much detail about how he really got started in business. The author, he does state that his sole intention is on the relationship between Carnegie and Frick, and he's just providing general background information for us here so that as a reader you can see what their roots look like. And I recently picked up 2 biographies on Frick, and I hope to cover those with you on the next episode, as that just kind of seems to be the natural progression of the story here, to take a look at Frick and his life. Meanwhile, for Carnegie, he advances from the factory to his first job as a messenger boy. And this puts $2.50 a week in his pocket. He's doubled his take-home pay. It actually didn't stay in his pocket. It all went to his family to help pay their debts. And he simply doesn't just deliver messages. He uses his gift of memorization here, and he learns all the businesses and all the men that are associated with those businesses. This helps him cut down his delivery time, and it gives him like this great honor to be able to deliver messages in the street. When he saw one of those businessmen, that was like a gold standard. If you could do that, that was a really, really big deal. And like Jim Casey, who had founded UPS, and we spoke about on episode 16, he knew that service was the real heart of the messenger delivery trade. For Carnegie, the steep level of service that he's putting into delivering these messages gets him noticed by his employer, and he's quickly promoted to that of a telegraph operator. And then for the first time, he's recruited by Thomas Scott, who was the superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. This increases his pay to something like $35 a month, and Thomas Scott would become a lifelong friend. This is someone that Carnegie called a hero. He looked up to him. He was a mentor. Carnegie also thought he was a genius at the same time. Not long after this, his boss, Mr. Scott, comes to Andrew, and he's going to ask him to invest $500 in Adams Express, which is a freight company. And this means that for the first time, Carnegie's money is now working for him. He's not working for money. He's putting his money into action. Upon getting his first dividend payment of $10, he's so excited. I love this part. He's so excited, he shouts, "Eureka! Here's the goose that lays the golden egg." And I can feel that energy and excitement each time I read that. Things, they start to move rapidly for Carnegie. He helps out during the Civil War for a brief period of time. He gets to meet President Lincoln as he waits for his telegraph messages to find out about the daily progress on the battlefields. Every war telegram in the country, it runs through Carnegie's hands. One thing that he notices is that there's this pressing need for rails and bridges and locomotives and armor. And he sees this hunger of industry all supporting the war efforts. And he knows they all need one thing: iron and steel. Not long after arriving in Washington, his boss, Mr. Scott, he gets called back by the railroad, and Carnegie, he naturally follows his hero. Back at home with what the war taught him, Carnegie, he sets up Cyclops Mills with Mr. Scott as one of his investors to start making iron. And he notices something. All of the wooden bridges that the railroad companies were building, they're always catching fire. This delays trains. by weeks as they're repairing bridges. So around 1864, 1865, Carnegie, along with his mentor, Mr. Scott, and then a few others, they formed Keystone Bridge Company. Cyclops, they make all the iron parts, and then Keystone, they go out and they put up the bridges. Things are going quite well for a young Carnegie here. Just listen to this. Carnegie was earning more than $45,000 a year from this and his investments, compared to a mere $2,400 a year from his railroad salary. Yet, he understood that it was the contacts he made and the information he derived from his association with the railroad that made everything possible. It's all about the relationships. While all of this is going on, Frick, he takes his first job working for his uncle at his general store. He takes this really, really serious. He understands that he has this natural talent for sales. In the book, it's described that he has these gray eyes and that his gaze really gets him noticed by people. And when he is staring at you, you just kind of feel compelled to take the actions that he's telling you. And if he's saying, wow, you look great in that shirt, you should buy it, well, people bought it. He was a really natural, gifted salesman. And after a few years of doing this, he decides to move to Pittsburgh and he starts working for an upscale department store. He's earning $7 a week, which was a pretty good wage at that time. But that doesn't last very long. His grandfather owned the distillery business and it was called Old Overhold. He was making rye whiskey. Frick, he's going to be hired as a bookkeeper for the great sum of $1,000 a year. It's interesting because that brand, it still exists today, and it's the longest standing American whiskey brand. It's currently owned by Jim Beam. And I was curious, so I took a look at the Jim Beam website, and it says on there that Henry Clay Frick bought the business in 1881 with Andrew Mellon. Now, it's not mentioned in the book, but this book is also not a biography about Frick, so I suspect that we'll learn more about that on the next episode. But for Frick, this bookkeeping job, it doesn't last too long because shortly after he starts doing this, Abe, he passes away. And at the time, Frick, he's really devastated to lose this job. But looking back, he says that fate has done him a favor, as we're about to see here. So Frick, he finds himself working for his cousin, and his cousin owned 200 acres of coal land and was just starting to make coal cakes, or what is known as coke. Basically, to make coke, they just bake the coal for a few days. This burns off all the sulfur that's in the coal, leaving just the carbon. Then this pure coke, it burns like a hot bluish white versus like this impure coal that gives off a lot of smoke with this really weak kind of yellowish flame. So they really needed the coke. This is going to become key here real soon to the story. At the age of 20, Frick, he can see that the iron and the steel is becoming more and more popular all over the state. And it just so happens that his cousin was looking for new investors into the coke business. So Frick, he goes out and he uses his sales skills and his confidence to convince other family members to lend him $10,000 from his not yet received inheritance that he was going to get from his grandfather. So with a 20% ownership in his hand, they go out and buy 123 more acres of coal land, and then they build a new coke plant as well. But this, for Frick, it wasn't enough. He travels to Pittsburgh, and he meets with the 57-year-old Thomas Mellon. Frick doesn't have any collateral. All he really has is his confidence in the future of coke and that powerful, gray-eyed gaze. Perhaps it was the strength he saw in Frick's eye that convinced Mellon, or perhaps it was his awareness of the Overhold blood that ran in his veins of the quiet but determined young man before him. But in any case, he approved the loan. Not long after, Frick, he's back in the bank for yet another loan. One of the loan officers says we should deny him. Mellon, he wants a second voice here. So he hires an engineer to go out and report back on what Frick was doing in his business. in one key line from the report that I wanted to read for you. It says, he knows his business down to the ground. And the one thing that we had learned from Sam Zamuri, this was episode 9, he would always say there's no problem you can't solve if you know your business from A to Z. Now, in this case, we can substitute A to Z with down to the ground. It's the same thing. Mellon approves the loan. Frick's business, it grows. 3 short years later, he has 200 Coke ovens, and he's selling Coke faster than they could possibly even produce it. And what's demanding all this Coke? The Bessemer steelmakers, which we'll talk about more here real soon, I promise. You see, to make steel, you have to heat this iron ore super, super hot, and only the Coke can do this. So in real simple terms, you can just think, no Coke, no steel. If you want steel, you need Coke. And who was making all the steel in Pittsburgh around this time? Carnegie. Or I guess Carnegie saw a documentary and they called him Carnegie a lot, so I kind of got that in my mind. But Carnegie, he was making all or a lot of the steel in Pittsburgh. If we focus back on Carnegie here for a moment, in the 1870s, he had taken a trip to England to sell $4 million worth of bonds, and these bonds were to help fund his largest bridge project, which was the St. Louis Bridge over the Mississippi River, or it would later become known as the Eads Bridge. And just a fun quick fact, that Eads Bridge, it's the first bridge in the United States that was made of 100% steel, and it's still in use today 151 years later. At any rate, while he was in Europe, he meets with Henry Bessemer, whose process was known as the Bessemer process, and this allowed for the rapid production of high-quality steel. Before the Bessemer, it took a long time to make steel, and it was very costly, and it could only be made in these small batches. With this new process, they can make tons and tons of steel in just like 15 or 20 minutes. In Carnegie, he doesn't let this technology pass him by because that's what his father did. And he has this deep promise to himself that he's never going to let that happen. So in 1873, during the financial panic, Carnegie makes this bold choice in his life to put all of his eggs into one basket. He's going to invest something like $250,000 of his own money into the new Edgar Thomson Steelworks. And then his goal, to watch the basket. And it turns out that building during this downturn was really a blessing for Carnegie, as described in the following way here. The decreased demand for materials and labor caused by the economic downturn resulted in nearly a 25% savings over the costs Carnegie had projected. For Carnegie, it was another invaluable business lesson. The best time to expand was when no one else dared to take the risk. There was, however, one other man taking similar risks during this time, Henry Clay Frick. Instead of turning tail, he used the depressions to his advantage, judiciously purchasing the coal lands and coke ovens of his failed and failing competitors. His relentless acquisitions continued until 1882. The company owned more than 3,000 acres of coal lands and more than 1,000 coke ovens. Wow, we can see that he went from 200 to 1,000 ovens in a pretty short period of time there. Now, as he's doing this, the cost of coke, it drops a lot. It's during the Depression here. And so he was barely making enough to scrape by. But as the market starts to come back, the cost per ton goes from 90 cents to $1, then to 2, 3, 4, 5. And by the time it reaches 5, this is giving Frick like a $3 profit margin. And this makes him a millionaire many times over by the age of just 30. As Frick grew, so did Carnegie. He adds more steel ovens, and he's even making his own coke at this time. Carnegie, he is going to slash his prices way below his competitors, In another saying that he always repeated quite often, he would say, cut the price, scoop the market, watch the costs, and the profits will take care of themselves. As an example of this, others are selling a ton of their rails for $70. He is selling them for $65. In 1880, Carnegie, he's making more than $1.5 million a year in profits. Like a stray dog jumping on a bone, Carnegie cuts cost. His mantra that he repeated over and over and over: profits and prices were cyclical, subject to any number of transient forces of the marketplace. Cost, however, could be strictly controlled. This is his driving force. And one of the biggest costs was baking coal. The ovens that he had in place, they were too small and he couldn't keep up. So what does he do? He sends his brother Tom out to scout out the biggest supplier of coke in the area, which is H.C. Frick Coke Company. Although Carnegie's intention was simply to reduce his business expenditures, it was a decision that would one day exact more from his purse and his person than he could possibly have dreamt. The twist here that lights Frick up, he has a huge pile of debt. He's been buying aggressively and he needs cash. Carnegie and Frick, they meet for the first time and they become fast friends. Frick Coke is going to become the exclusive supplier for Carnegie Steel. Frick, he's going to take half an interest in Carnegie's coke ovens, and Carnegie would now own 10% interest in the H.C. Frick Coke Company. Their first meeting, it was long and loud, and the deal was sealed with a toast. And right away, when Frick's not around, Carnegie brags about how he controls half of the King of Coke's holdings. And this is the first tiny crack. Something that we see Carnegie do time and time again is talk shit behind Frick's back. And the shit always makes its way back to Frick in one way or another. But for right now, things are golden. Carnegie loves the fact that Frick sends detailed statements. They're brothers in arms when it comes to cost control. He writes to Frick saying, I am much pleased with the statement sent me. I think we can live in any kind of weather. Sales from H.C. Frick in the first 14 months of their agreement are more than 950,000 tons of coke. That's a lot of coke. And a profit of $375,000 or a 23% profit margin. Frick, he wants more. He continues to pursue growth through acquisitions, bankrolling these purchases with the sale of his company stock to Carnegie. Those last few words are really big to the story because Carnegie, he just keeps buying in H.C. Frick. And in just a few short years, that boast that he was making becomes true. He is now 50% owner of that company. While Frick is the powerful face of Coke, his ownership in his own company is down to just 17%. For Carnegie, the benefits just pile up. He has access to all the Coke that he could possibly want, and he's saving 20% versus making it himself. Plus, he's making profits from the Coke sales. Imagine $2 million in a pile. Then you have profits from steel. That's another pile of $2 million. Now, for Frick, things are about to get uncomfortable here because you see in 1884, a group of Coke producers, they came together to form what was known as the Coke Syndicate. And the goal here was to put the price of Coke at $1.50 a ton. They wanted to stabilize the price. Somehow, Carnegie, he got wind of this, and he sends one of his emissaries, John Walker, to the meeting. And in front of everyone, he asks, how much would it be for him? Meaning Carnegie in this case. Frick, he says it's $1.50 a ton, same price. Walker shakes his head, and he says, Carnegie would only pay H.C. Frick $1.15 per ton, and there would be no further discussion on the matter. Now just put yourself in Frick's shoes here for a moment. You're the leading figure in your industry, and in front of your peers, you're being dictated to, not even from the man himself, but by proxy. Frick was stunned, and he also realized how the power had shifted. Gentlemen, he said to his fellow Coke producers, you have just heard what the worthy representative of the majority stockholders in the H.C. Frick Coke Company said. In the next breath, he resigned his position from the Coke syndicate, then left the room to embark on a voyage to Europe, returning only when Carnegie cabled an apology through a mutual friend. I picture a foundation here. It had a minor crack before. Now it has a big major crack running right down the middle. Frick, eventually, he does come back to America. And from Carnegie's eyes, as described by the author, he sees the following. Frick's talents for spotting acquisitions at a bargain was infallible, as was his knack for managing his properties efficiently. The first shadow boxing match between these two men is over, and it's time for them to go dance again. Frick, he knows that Coke is a second-rate business. He wants a piece of the steel action, and he needs Carnegie for this. So he keeps selling his stake in his company until he's down to 4% ownership, and he wants to put all of this into Carnegie Brothers Steel. Andrew, he learns of his plan, and he whips out his knife. Well, the knife of letter and pen, that is, saying the following. You have made the mistake of your life. You must stay in Coke. I cannot imagine how your pride permitted you to think for one moment of sinking to an insignificant holder of 4% in your own creation. To think that you could ever be influential in its councils with such a petty interest is absurd. You would merely be the agent of the real men in that concern. This idea is suicidal. Another punch in the nose here. Frick, he remains in the Coke plant, and he's making millions for Carnegie. But like the past, he is determined to make his way into steel one way or another. If we jump forward here, about a year to 1886, Carnegie, he falls gravely ill with typhoid. And at this time, typhoid was almost a death sentence. At this same time, his brother Tom, who was the head of operations, dies from pneumonia in October. Tom had been a solid manager, but sometimes reluctant and risk adverse. There would be no such timidity with Frick. It had taken the death of his brother to accomplish it, but Carnegie had his man. He's going to offer Frick $100,000 in Carnegie Brothers stock that was payable with future dividends. That's perfect for Frick. He's in almost immediately with a 2% ownership of the company. The passing of Tom also leads to what Carnegie is going to call the ironclad agreements. And this is really important to the story because when Tom dies, he owns 17% of the company. So Andrew, he's able to absorb Tom's share and pay out his widow. But he realizes that if it would have been himself that died with a 55% ownership, that would have been a disaster for the company with no plan in place. So this agreement, it gives partners ample time to buy out deceased partners should that happen. And it also gives them provisions to buy each other out. The ironclad, as we're going to see later on, it's going to become a deadly weapon that's used by Carnegie against Frick and some of the others in the business. But in the meantime, steel, it's booming and profits, they're stacking up. And workers, they can see this. They want a 20% increase in pay. Labor issues, they make Frick's head absolutely pop off. And from his view, it's wasted time and money. The men should be working, plain and simple. To get a better understanding of Frick and his view on this, we have to go back 10 years here. During the 1877 railroad strike that disputed the shipment of coal and coke, Frick accompanied a sheriff's deputy to help evict a striker who lived in a shack on the property Frick had sold at the handsome profit to the B&O Railroad. Told that he would have to leave, the striker refused. Frick, who weighed all of 130 pounds, glanced at the deputy, and an unspoken message passed between them. In the next moment, they grabbed the unsustainable striker by the hands and feet, flung him off the embankment and into the nearby creek. As the striker struggled to his feet, he found his belongings flying after him, including his mattress, bedclothes, and razor. That is Frick. He did the dirty work. Back to the current strike. Carnegie, he tells Frick to arbitrate. So he does what his boss says, and he agrees to a 10% raise. The workers reject it. Frick, he's in between a rock and a hard spot here. Carnegie, the major shareholder, tells him to give in. Just give them in 20%. Get these guys back to work. And Frick, he absolutely hates this. If the men, they go on strike, it's going to wound Carnegie's steel of the coke that they need. On the other hand, giving in, it's going to make Frick look really weak to his fellow coke producers because they're going to have to match the rates, and it's going to hurt their businesses as well. And what happens next kind of shocked me. Frick responded in a rather startling fashion to Carnegie's demands, that he settle with the strikers. In the letter, Frick got quickly to the point. As you hold the majority of the stock and are entitled to control in the Frick Coke Company, and in viewing what has passed between us on the subject, I feel compelled to vacate my position as its president. I therefore enclose herewithin my resignation. No arguments, no negotiation, just a resignation. It's the summer of 1887, and the shadow of Andrew Carnegie runs to Europe to hide out on an extended vacation. But just a few short paragraphs later in the book, Andrew, he's now in Scotland. He starts to send messages to Frick for him to come and visit. He is reaching out to him like he's a good old buddy and there's no rift in between them. And he's going to say, like, come and spend a week with us. It's superb. Come and see what Scotland is like in the summers. And this just goes on and on and on until Frick, he decides in September to finally go for a visit. Carnegie saw that Frick was no puppet, but rather a man willing to take considerable risk in defense of his own principles. He had also seen in Frick a managerial capacity second to none. He was willing to overlook Frick's resignation as the understandable act of a proud man. They're going to reach a deal here, and this is going to allow Frick to come back as the president of the company that has his name on it. Then to sweeten things a little bit here, a few months later, Frick, he's going to be named as the chairman of Carnegie Brothers, and his share in the company is going to go from 2% to 11%. And Carnegie would say the following: with Mr. Frick at the head, I have no fear. To hammer this home from the book here. But to Carnegie, Frick represented something special. Not only had Frick risen from nothing as Carnegie had, and not only had he proved himself the master of an allied industry, an essential subsidiary to that of steel, Frick had ambition, a singleness of purpose, and a lack of self-doubt that even Carnegie envied. From day one, Frick, he is on the job. He immediately fires their lead accountant and he brings in his own. He has firm demands on the workers. You either like Frick's way or you go flying down the hill with your mattress soon to follow, and probably your razor too. And Frick, he leads by example. Frick worked from dawn till dusk, taking no holidays, and familiarizing himself with every detail of the company business. It goes back to knowing your business down to the ground, knowing your business A to Z. This is what Frick did. Carnegie is going to try to tell him how to manage. Frick fires back. I cannot stand fault finding, that I must feel that I have the entire confidence of the power that put me where I am. Carnegie backs off and he says, let me express the relief I feel in knowing that the important departments of our extended business are in the hands of a competent manager. Next up, they find themselves dancing in a business deal. So Carnegie, he learns about a new factory and they're going to use a new technology to produce steel. This is going to lower their costs, lower costs than what Carnegie had. To him, this is just a flashback to his father, and he's seeing his father get steamrolled by technology, and this was a promise that he had made to himself. He wasn't going to let that happen. So what does he do? He sends a letter to every railroad in the country saying that this new process is proven, scientifically proven, to lead to rail failures and fatalities. The real truth here, this was a big, fat lie that Carnegie made up. At the blink of an eye, his competitor is dead. Railroads, they pull all their orders. Next, he sends Frick in to do the dirty work. He's going to offer $600,000 for a plant that they just paid $1 million to construct. The owners, of course, reject it. Frick, he goes back sometime later and he says, okay, we'll pay you $1 million. They accept it. And those inferior ways of making steel are almost immediately put into practice. But now they're labeled as cutting edge advancements. Carnegie, he praises Frick, saying, Frick is a marvel. That is just crazy and nuts that he would make up that lie to destroy his competitor. I guess that's why they're called robber barons. I don't think what he did was illegal at the time. Today it certainly would be, but that's just a wild, crazy story. So what we're going to do here is we're going to move into the late 1880s. In the book, it shifts focus to the labor issues at the time that were happening at the Edgar Thomas and the Homestead mills. And these labor issues cover half of the book, 40%, maybe 60%, something like that. It takes up a lot of space in the book. And it would be very difficult to put that all into one episode. And for all the details, I hope that you can pick up a copy of the book and spend some time reading about that. It's very fascinating. And the main thing to keep in mind here is that Carnegie and Frick, they're both in agreement on strict cost control. They're both locked arm in arm on that. But when it came to the unions, they both have different views. For Carnegie, they're just part of the deal. What he would do is he would just shut the plants down for months at a time and basically starve the men out until they would give in to whatever it is that he was offering. For Frick, well, he would just toss you and your mattress down a hill. He didn't give two shits about unions. So here in 1888, the Edgar Thompson mill, they go out on strike. Carnegie, he just shuts it down. 4 months, no work for the men. The union, who was the Amalgamated Association, for simplicity, I'm just going to call them the union for the episode here. They finally break after 4 months, and they agree to this sliding scale pay rate. Basically, the more tons that they produce, the more they get paid. Now, about a year later at a Homestead, this is a different mill site. The men there, they go out on strike. Carnegie, he is in Europe, and he wants to use this sliding scale. Now, the superintendent of the plant was a gentleman by the name of Abbott, and he wants to bring in these replacement workers. So with the help of 125 sheriff's deputies, they show up with replacement workers. And when they arrive, there's more than 2,000 workers that are blocking the entrance to the plant. and they're on strike. They're screaming and they're yelling. And these temporary workers, they see this, and there's no way they're going across this line. Basically, they flee for their lives. And after this police incident, Abbott, he's so worked up, he doesn't know what to do. He basically agrees to negotiate with the union. Carnegie, he's in Europe. Abbott, he just does what he thinks is best here. And what happens is that the union is going to be formally recognized as the sole rightful bargaining agent at Homestead, basically meaning that no man can be fired or hired without the union approval. And they would agree for a 3-year contract that runs until July 1st of 1892. This really gave the union a lot of power at Homestead. When Carnegie learns about this, he's livid. This was not his instructions. He knows in his mind that Frick, if he was in place, never would have given into the unions like this. All of these strikes that we're seeing here and that we're talking about, I think about a spring and just taking your hand and coiling that up, a giant spring, putting all this tension and pressure in there. And it's just like a ticking time bomb. As we approach the summer of 1892, things are going to explode. But before we get into the Homestead strike, something happens that changes everything. Inside the plant, Captain Jones, he was Carnegie's technical genius. He's going to be killed by an explosion. Jones, one of the most innovative technical minds in the industry. In fact, more patents were registered to his name than any other individual in steel. And those inventions had been incalculable to Carnegie and his operations. So along with Jones's technical genius, he also was very well respected by the men in the plant. And after his death, there's this major void in the plant. Jones, he was trusted, and now he's gone. Men start getting more and more attached to the union. And Frick, he sees this void and he knows that the leadership, they're in big trouble here. Superintendent Abbott, he's in a weakened position with the union. They just don't respect Abbott. He makes a really bold move. Frick approached Carnegie with an ambitious proposal. Now was the time to reorganize his eggs into one basket, once and for all. Take the Carnegie brothers and the Carnegie Phipps business and combine them together. Carnegie scratches his head and he's a bit resistant to this idea. Frick reminded Carnegie in a single year as head of Carnegie Brothers, he had increased profits from a little less than $2 million a year to more than $3.5 million. Clearly, Carnegie had chosen a management genius. Why not let the genius manage everything? The papers are drawn up, and all the eggs are now put into one basket, the Carnegie Steel Company. It's going to be capitalized at $25 million on April 1st, 1892. Big AC himself, he holds 55%. Frick, he retains his 11% and is now in charge of the largest steelmaker on the planet. Carnegie steps further away from day-to-day operations, and this leads us directly into the Homestead strike in July of 1892. Frick, he was getting ready for a war. A few months before, he orders a 9-foot-tall fence with barbed wire to be put around the top. This surrounds the 600-acre mill grounds. In addition, it was equipped with these outlook towers so men could sit up there and watch for any potential people trying to climb over the top. The newspapers, they go on and they call it Fort Frick. If we go back just a little bit to April, Carnegie, he calls Frick to New York to discuss a plan of attack in person because he was getting ready to sail for Europe for the summer. Carnegie, he reminds Frick that, you know what, in the worst case, the ultimate step is really simple. They're going to just close the plant. They're going to starve the men out. Eventually they'll come around. During this meeting, Frick, he doesn't say anything and they part ways. few days later, Frick sends a telegraph. It may become necessary to fight it out this summer. We will get ready for the fight immediately. It will be necessary, all the better. It may be a stubborn one, but if once got into, without regard to cost of time, it will be fought to the finish. Now, if I'm Carnegie and I'm reading that, I have to be thinking that fighting it out is going to be referring to the orders that I had just given Frick to shut down the plant, to wait it out. But from Frick's view, it has a different meaning. He isn't going to shut shit down. Remember, he hates unions. Fort Frick goes up. Carnegie and Frick, they keep riding back and forth. And I feel like they're ships passing in the night. They're missing each other's point of view here. At home, Frick, he would agree to this small raise for the union men. He felt that they shouldn't be paid any more than non-union men. Tensions in that spring, they keep building. And he sends a message to Carnegie in late June saying, "It may be that we will win without much difficulty, although I am not yet prepared to believe that we will win without a pretty severe struggle, and am not sure even with the agreement of these men to work, that they will do so, provided we will find it necessary to bring in guards." At home, Frick, he arranges to bring in 300 Pinkerton guards, who are ready to defend the mill starting right after the 4th of July holiday. Carnegie, he claims to know nothing about this, and he's going to hold this position until he dies. The last word that Frick receives before the men go out on strike says the following: "We will approve of anything you do, not stopping short of approval of a contest. We are with you to the end." Repeat that last line one more time. We are with you to the end. If you're Frick, based upon the messages that you've already sent and then what you're seeing coming into you, in my mind, it's full steam ahead. Bring in the guards so that the new workers can take the spot of the men that are on strike. Frick already had like 2,000 men lined up and ready to go. If we go to June 29th, Frick, he posts a notice. Basically, it says that Carnegie Steel is no longer going to be a union shop after July 1st. If any man wants his job, they're free to come down and sign up. They can keep their job. It's now a non-union shop. By 9 p.m. that evening, 3,800 men were on strike. Now, only about a quarter of them were union men. The rest were non-union. But most of those union men, they're the really high-skilled workers that they need in the plant. And this simply wasn't a strike with men standing out front of the gates. This is a full-blown lockout war. Men are posted all around the plant. They're on bridges, they're out on roads, all over the town. They're down by the waterfront and they're watching and they're listening. They're up on the hillsides, they're using binoculars. No one is going to steal their right to make a living for their families. Frick sends a telegram to Carnegie saying, "Homestead seems to be the center of attraction, and I do not think anything has been left undone towards securing us a complete victory at the place. We shall, of course, keep within the law and do nothing that is not entirely legal." I can see Carnegie as he's reading that, nodding with approval, as he's getting ready to set off for a peaceful day of fishing while he's in Scotland. But at Homestead, that coiled spring is about to pop. The local newspapers start to report that outside guards are expected, and they're not wrong. On the evening of July 5th, 2 barges, they launch about 10 miles upstream from the plant with 300 armed guards. They're stocked with guns and ammo, and they float towards the plant. By 2:30 a.m. on the morning of the 6th, A watchman on one of the bridges is going to see the barge floating towards the plant. He sprints to the nearest telegraph office. He taps out a message. And a few seconds after that, the whistle on top of the Union Hall starts screaming into the night. Within a few minutes, thousands of workers and townspeople, they're on the banks of the river. No one is taking their jobs. No one. It's now 4 a.m., an hour and a half after the barges were spotted, and they're starting to turn towards the shore. Union officials, they're shouting, telling them to turn back, to get out of here. They're not wanted. The barges, they move forward. The first shots are fired across the ship, and then they're fired at the ship, taking out the windows. The crew, they drop to the deck. They keep moving towards the company docks, and these were protected behind the walls of Fort Frick. But these walls, they're like toothpicks with hordes of men just pushing against them. They fall easily, and they flood into company property. Now, this is important. From Frick's view, these strikers just broke the law by trespassing. It's no longer in his hands. It's in the hands of the law. It's out of his hands. This is a law issue now in his mind. Down at the docks, the union leader, his name is O'Donnell, that's his last name, he's trying to reason with these men, and he's saying, on behalf of 5,000 men, I beg you to leave here at once. I don't know who you are, nor from where you come, but I do know that you have no business here. A little time passes. Captain Hindy, he was the leader of the Pinkertons. He emerges, and he responds in the following way. We were sent here to take possession of this property and to guard it for the company. I don't wish to shed blood, but if you men don't withdraw, we will mow every one of you down and enter in spite of you. You had better dispense. For land, we will. Man, those are harsh words. Union leader O'Donnell, he's going to give one final warning here. He's going to say, I have no more to say. What you do here is at the risk of many lives. Before you enter these mills, you will trample over dead bodies of 3,000 honest working men. The guards, they start down the gangplanks to the docks. And only history really knows who fired the first shots. But needless to say, it is on. One shot is going to hit Captain Hindy. He's bleeding badly. The other men on board of the barges, they line up with their Winchester rifles and they just start firing towards the shore. From the shore, they fire back. Men throw dynamite from the hills to the barges, and then just listen to this. Some strikers had borrowed a Civil War cannon, and they shot a big hole in the side of the barge. They go to fire a second time, and it kills the men who are trying to fire it. It backfires on them. And this goes on for about 10 minutes or so, and more than 20 men on both sides fall. By 6 a.m., calm descends. Onlookers from the hills, they're watching like it's a baseball game. By 8 a.m., the Pinkertons, they're frustrated, they're pinned down. They try to come on land. Again, another battle breaks out. Bullets are flying everywhere. Men's skulls are cracked open. Bodies are dropping like flies. On the barge, the Pinkertons, they divide. You see, only about 40 of the 300 were trained in warfare. The other 260, they had just been rounded up the day before. And imagine you're on the street, you're unemployed, someone comes and they offer you good pay and 3 square meals. You sign up, they don't tell you what you're doing. That was the 260 men. A lot of them simply refuse orders and they hide down below. The guards, they finally realize that they're outdone here and they raise a white flag. It's shot down. Surrender is way too kind for these job stealers, so they raise another white flag. Again, shot down. Workers on shore, they quickly learn that the governor of Pennsylvania has been notified about what's going on, and they fear that the militia is soon going to be sent in. Finally, around 4 p.m., this has been 12 hours now, the Union leader O'Donnell, he negotiates a surrender with the Pinkertons, and they finally walk off the barge. And they were promised not to be treated badly. They arrive on land, and almost every man is beaten, they're kicked, they're clubbed. Women, listen to this, is crazy. Women were throwing scalding water on them. They're detained and then finally sent back to New Jersey by a train. On this day, a dozen workers are killed, along with 2 Pinkerton guards. And then just about every guard suffers some form of injury as they're beaten on land. The next day, the president of the Union informs Frick that they're willing to concede on all issues except the date which they would set the rate of the steel price. This rate was really important. Let's say the rate is $25 a ton. And this is a firm number that they use to pay wages. And they would set this rate in the summertime. Frick wanted to set the rate on December 31st when the steel prices were the lowest. In the Union, they obviously want to use June 30th when the prices were the highest. Frick's response to the Union on this, he says, "I told the gentleman who called that we would not confer with the Union. It is in the hands of the authorities of Allegheny County." In fact, Frick, he no longer recognizes the Union. In his mind, they no longer exist. If you boil all of this down, this is nuts. The savings to Carnegie Steel only amounts to about $20,000 on $5 million in profits. But it's much deeper than that, a lot deeper than that. A few days later, 8,000 militiamen arrive to protect the property plant. Messages between Frick and Carnegie, they're flowing back and forth. Carnegie says, "We are with you no matter what, and stopping nothing short of a contest." Frick says, "Governor's actions settle matter. All right now, no compromise." The strike, it continues. We move into Saturday afternoon, July 23rd. Frick, he's working in his office. He turns around when he hears the door open behind him. And what does he see? He sees a man by the name of Alexander Berkman. Berkman was a proclaimed anarchist, and he had a gun in his hand. As Berkman later writes about this, I want to read this for you. "As I raise the weapon, I see Frick's clutch with both hand and arm of the chair, and attempt to raise. I aim at his head. Perhaps he wears armor, I reflect. With a look of horror, he quickly averts his face as I pull the trigger. There is a flash, and the high-ceiling room reverberates with the booming of a cannon. I hear a sharp, piercing cry, and see Frick on his knees, his head against the arm of the chair. I feel calm and possessed, intent upon every movement of the man. He's lying head and shoulders under a large armchair, without sound or motion. Dead, I wonder. I must make sure." Frick is down, but he's not dead, and at this point, he's crawling on his hands and knees towards the door. He's shouting, "Murderer! Help! Murderer! Help!" Berkman, he points the pistol at Frick's back. He pulls the trigger, and as he does so, his hand is struck away by a company vice president that was also in the room. Berkman, he beats the VP back, and he advances on Frick again. From the book here, he pointed the pistol at the spot between Frick's eyes and pulled the trigger again. There was a dull click, but no explosion came. Berkman stared at the pistol in disbelief. Frick's eyes rose to something over Berkman's shoulders. And then Frick sees something. He says that a radiant vision of Martha appeared suddenly at his side, an apparition so vivid that Frick had been convinced she was real. And Martha was his young daughter. that had died many years previous. And it gives me chills reading that section. As he's dying, he's seeing his daughter there. Berkman attempts to fire again at Frick's head, but before he could, Berkman felt a rush of air and then a thunderous crack of a hammer, wielded by a company carpenter, drove into the back of his head. The shooter lay unconscious on the floor. Now, just moments later, a doctor, a surgeon arrives. And listen to this. This is wild. Frick, he refuses anesthetics. He calmly assists the doctor to probe the wounds for the bullets that were inside of him. That is nuts. That's crazy. The doctor advises him that he needs to go to the closest hospital. And listen to this. Frick would have none of it. He insisted that the wounds be sold up then and there, and next had himself propped up in his chair, where he completed the letter he had been working on. After that, he signed the rest of the day's essential correspondence, took time to dictate 2 telegraphs, one to his mother and the other to Carnegie, letting them know he was okay. Talk about a deep drive. Never before on the show have we seen a founder get shot up like that and continue to work. That is just effing nuts. Frick is going to go and recover at home for the next 2 weeks. He has a telegraph cable in his home. He just works from home for 2 weeks. He recovers there, but he comes back to the office. This assassination attempt, it turns the public's view even further against the strikers. Even though Berkman wasn't officially a striker, he was from a completely different anarchist group, it still shifted the public's view. Men start returning to work. First there was 100, then there was 1,000. They were working around the clock again. Finally, in mid-November, the strikers, they surrender. Carnegie, still in Europe, he sends Frick the following message. Through with the war at last. What a relief. Think I'm about 10 years older than when we last met. Europe has rung with Homestead. Homestead. We are all sick of that name, but it's all over now. Now for long years of peace and prosperity. The labor strike suppresses the steel union, and they're not going to make their way back into the factories for 40 more years. For Carnegie, the whole time, he claims innocence against Frick's actions, saying that he didn't know that the guards were going to be called in. He maintains that position for the rest of his life. And at the same time, he stabs Frick in the back, telling personal friends that he would have handled Homestead differently simply by shutting it down and starving the men out, and that no drops of blood would have been shed on his watch. He writes the following about this in his autobiography, and we covered this on the last episode, but this is how he saw it. Nothing I have ever had to meet in all my life, before or since, wounded me so deeply. No pangs remain of any wound received in my business career, save that of Homestead. Carnegie needed Frick to do the dirty work, and that's exactly what he did. Once the dust settles, he returns to America. Frick, he continues to run Carnegie Steel through the rest of the 1890s. In a series of events are finally going to put the stake in the ground to divide these men forever. In 1899, Frick, he sells the company some land that he had owned for $3,500 an acre. $500 below the appraised value of $4,000 an acre. Really a good deal. Well, Carnegie, he finds out that Frick only paid $700 an acre for this land, and he was making more than $1 million in profit by making that sale to the company. He stabs Frick in the back again, calling him a traitor and a tyrant to his friends. Later that year, Frick, he learns that Carnegie is trying to privately go out and buy up new coke land. Frick takes this personal. He sees the company that he founded, H.C. Frick Coke Company, going out of business over this. He storms into a board meeting and he insists that the following be added to the minutes. He wants to be on record about these actions. The value of our Coke properties for over a year has been, at every opportunity, depreciated by Mr. Carnegie and Mr. Lauder. I submit that it is not unreasonable that I have considerable feelings on this subject. This goes on further. He accuses Carnegie for being less than a man, for not saying these things directly to his face. I have stood a great many insults from Mr. Carnegie in the past, but I will submit to no further insults in the future. Frick is pissed. Carnegie wants him out of the company. Jump forward just a little bit here. It's January 9th, 1900. Frick is removed as chairman of the company. A day later, Carnegie walks into Frick's office with the ironclad agreement. Now, a couple of words here on the ironclad. It gave rights to the owners to sell their interest in the company at the valuation price of the company, which had been for a long time set at $50 million. Now, in reality, the company was worth $2 to maybe $250 million. They were making in some years $40 million in profits. And there's a lot of stories on the book that cover the various ways that the owners tried to get Carnegie to revalue the business. And I really do hope that you can pick up a copy of the book, because there's so many cliffhangers in there just on this subject alone. However, Carnegie, he refuses, 100% refuses to have the company revalued. He insists 50 million, that's the number. Take it or leave it. Now, there was another stipulation here that said that by 2/3 agreement of the other owners, they could buy out any other owner that they saw fit. And one thing to keep in mind is there were a boatload of small owners with 1% or less. Carnegie controlled all those guys, so it wasn't difficult for him to get that 2/3. So Carnegie, he's in Frick's office. This is the same one that he had been shot in 8 years previous. Carnegie, he has a different type of gun, the ironclad, and he says, the board has no choice but to invoke provisions of the ironclad agreement. Frick's interest in the company must be surrendered. His compensation will be at book value and not a penny more. Frick would receive $1.5 million for the stock that was worth at least 10 times as much. Staying here in the book. Frick was on his feet now, his chair tipping backwards with a crash. For years, I have been convinced there is not an honest bone in your body, he shouted at Carnegie. Now I know you are a goddamn thief. He crumpled up the document and tossed it aside. We'll have a judge and jury of Allegheny County decide what you are to pay me, he added. He spun around his desk, advancing on Carnegie with his fist raised. Accounts of what happens next, they're varied. Most claim that Frick chases him down the hall to his office. Carnegie slams the door closed before Frick could get inside. For years, their shadows, they shook hands, they danced, they boxed, they hid from one another, they told lies that cut deep wounds that left thick scars. They made up, they danced again, they hid, they told lies, and they repeated the pattern until they no longer could. Needless to say, this was the last meeting of Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick. For Frick, he goes out, and I admire this, he goes out immediately and he retains a lawyer, D.T. Watson, who had written the ironclad in the first place. They also bring in John Johnson, and Johnson was a very well-noted trial attorney at the time. Next day, Carnegie, he decides to take a casual stroll over to see his old buddy Johnson in person, and he learns that he's already been retained by Frick. Johnson cannot help the big AC here. I would have liked to have been in the room to see Carnegie's face when he learned that news. Frick and his team, they immediately poke holes in the ironclad. First, it says that any partner who owned their shares outright with no debt to the company was excluded. That applies to Frick. That's him. Second, there was a major revision in 1892, and most of the partners didn't sign that revision. The next thing they do here is they file a lawsuit against Carnegie. And this is really damning because it means that he's going to have to open up the company books for discovery. And when you do that, the public is going to see everything. For the first time, that squeaky clean public mask is going to come off, and everyone is going to see those massive profits. We're talking $40 million a year. The average worker at this time is only making $500 a year. A few months later, Frick and Carnegie, they settle. It was in Carnegie's interest to settle. Carnegie, he's going to combine Carnegie Steel, that was valued at $250 million, and the H.C. Frick Coat Company, that was valued at $70 million. He's going to put those into one company. And Frick's take, $15.5 million in stock and nearly $16 million in 5% first mortgage bonds, roughly $31 million in total. Then a year later, Carnegie, he sells to J.P. Morgan for $480 million. Frick's pile grows to over $70 million. That's a drastic turn of events from $1.5 million that Carnegie wanted to shove down his throat to over $70 million. I guess the ironclad was more like a leaky bucket. To end the show today, we go back to the beginning of the episode, which is really the end of the story. Carnegie's secretary is going to return from Frick's mansion, and I imagine him saying the following: "Sir, with all due respect, Carnegie says that he will meet you in hell where you are both going." In the book, Carnegie was disheartened by Frick's rebuff. Carnegie, he's going to live a few more months, and he's going to pass away August 11th of 1919 in his 54-room estate in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. For Frick, in November of that same year, he had been suffering from a cold and also from food poisoning. He recovered a little, but he was generally ill. Then on December 2nd, Frick, he wakes. He asks his butler to bring him a glass of water, drinks it down, and announces, "I think I'll go to sleep now." Closes his eyes, and a few moments later, he died. These two men, they were born 14 years apart. They died within weeks of each other. Like a pair of married shadows, long divided, but still attached at some subconscious level. I really do hope that you can pick up a copy of this book. It's a fun, fast read. And careful, you might cut yourself turning the pages so quickly. Till next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.